You got a call sign, sweetheart? Let me guess. Diesel. The sun was not up yet. His voice was. Captain Dane Merrick stood over the woman kneeling at the grounding point of his F-35, thumbs hooked in the straps of his G-suit, and asked the fuel truck driver her call sign as a joke. 2 pilots behind him laughed on cue. The flight line was still gray. The row of jets ran off into the dark like a row of sleeping animals, and the only warm thing on it was the smell of jet fuel and cold coffee, and the ticking heat off an auxiliary power unit somewhere down the line. The woman did not look up right away. She finished torquing the single-point receptacle, felt the click come through her glove, and checked the number the way a person checks a pulse. 1/4 turn past snug, exactly there. Then she stood. She wore blank fuels coveralls, fire retardant, a reflective belt across the chest. No name tape, no rank. Nothing on her at all except the belt and a small green notebook in her chest pocket, worn soft at the corners. She was maybe 40. She was calm in a way that did not fit the joke, and the calm was the part that should have warned him. "Grounds are good," she said. 3 words. Merrick grinned wider. He liked an audience, and he had one. "I asked you a question. Every real aviator has a call sign. What's yours? Unleaded? 10-gallon? Come on, help me out here." Her eyes moved once, and they did not move to him. They moved to his jet. Up the nose, across the pylons, over the panels. She looked at the pitot cover still hanging red off the boom, and the number 2 panel sitting a hair proud of its fastener, and the way the drop tank rode its rack, and she read the aircraft the way a pilot clears an aircraft before she ever lays a hand on it. Not the way a driver looks at a truck, the way a person looks at a thing they are about to trust with their life. "Your pitot cover's still on," she said, "and your number 2 panel's proud. I'd have someone look before you take the runway." One of the pilots behind him stopped laughing. Merrick glanced at his jet, found the red flag hanging exactly where she said it was, and his ears went pink in the cold. He covered it with volume, the way he covered everything. "That's what you people are for. Pull it. That's the whole job." He clapped his hands twice, sharp, like a man calling a dog. "Come on, Diesel. Sun's coming up. Some of us fly for a living." She pulled the cover. She coiled the strap in 3 neat loops. She did not give him one thing more than the cover and the coil, and somehow that was worse for him than an argument would have been. 30 feet away, Senior Master Sergeant Elias Warwick crossed the row with a tablet under his arm and watched the whole thing without breaking stride. 22 years on flight lines had taught Warwick to read people the way the woman had just read the jet. He had seen 1,000 new airmen come through. New airmen flinched. New airmen filled the silence with apology. This one had come up off the cold concrete, like she owned the concrete, and she had cleared a captain's aircraft with 2 sweeps of her eyes and named 2 write-ups the captain had walked right past. Warwick filed it away. He had a launch to run and 40 jets to push, but he filed it, the way you file the one wrong note in a song you have heard 10,000 times. Nearby, a young airman fumbled a bond wire against the receiver of the next jet and dropped it clattering onto the mat. Airman First Class Lena Sackett, 20 years old, 6 months on the line, all elbows and nerves, and a helmet bag too big for her. Merrick wheeled on her before she got the wire back in her hands. "Sackett, are you kidding me? That's a live jet. Do it again, and I will have you counting lug nuts in the tool room until you retire." Sackett's hands shook. The woman in the coverall stepped over, took the bond wire from the mat without being asked, seated it clean against bare metal, and said one quiet thing to the girl, low enough that only she could hear it. "Green to bare metal. Say it back to me." "Green to bare metal," Sackett whispered, "every single time. That's all it is. You're fine." Sackett looked down at her own hands, then up at the woman. and something in her chest loosened a half-inch. She did not know the woman's name. She did not know one single thing about her, except that she had crossed 20 feet of cold concrete to make the shaking stop with 4 words, which was more than anyone else on the ramp had bothered to do for her in 6 months. Merrick walked off toward the ops desk, laughing with his wingmen, certain he had met a nobody at dawn and put her where nobodies go. The woman did not watch him leave. She watched his jet. Her watch read exactly 0611, and she filed that away too. The launch cycle started, and the flight line woke up the way it always did. All at once, loud and hungry. Engines lit down the row. The ramp filled with the smell of burnt kerosene and the shimmer of exhaust, and the noise climbed until every word on the line had to be shouted or signed. The woman took the R-11 refueler down the row. On the schedule, she was a fuels augmentee, the lowest thing on a busy ramp, the person everyone shouts a number at and nobody thanks. She serviced 3 jets clean and fast, her hands quick on the dead man and the nozzle, her eyes always coming back to the aircraft first and the fuel second. On the 4th jet, Merrick's swap jet, the one he was hot to fly, she pulled a fuel sample, and she did the thing that almost nobody does anymore. She actually looked at it. Her hands ran the sample without the checklist. The checklist was in her hands the way a song is in a piano player's hands. She drew the vial, held it up to the pale light coming over the hangars, and went still. Not startled. Still. Water. And particulate suspended in it, a slow gray thread turning in the fuel like smoke underwater. She ran the test kit, worked the reagent, and read the number off it exactly, out loud, to herself. 240 parts per million. Past limits. She capped the vial. This one does not fly. The crew chief bristled. A fuels troop did not ground a captain's jet. You sure about that, Diesel? I'm sure. She keyed her handset and relayed it to maintenance control in the flat, clipped phrasing of a person who had spent an entire career on a radio. Tail number, discrepancy, the exact reading, request for a recheck and a swap. Not one wasted word. Warwick, 2 jets down, heard the transmission and turned his head, because that was not how a fuels augmentee talked to maintenance control. That was how aircrew talked to a wingman in weather. Short, certain, built to be understood the first time. Merrick came off the ops desk like a shot the second he heard his jet was down again. You have got to be kidding me. You grounded my jet. Twice. On a sample. He said the word sample like it was a childish thing, a toy. I have a combat-coded sortie in 40 minutes. Do you even understand what that means? While you were learning to back up a truck, I was... Chief. Warwick had walked up, unhurried. He did not raise his voice. He took the vial out of her hand, held it to the light himself, and turned it slow. The gray thread turned with it, unmistakable now that a second set of eyes was on it. Warwick had grounded jets for less. He had also, a long time ago, carried a casket for a fuel problem that a tired crew waved through at dawn, and he had never once forgotten the weight of it on his shoulder. It's bad, Warwick said. Swap it. Log it. Trace the truck it came off of. He turned to the captain, flat. Sir, your jet flies when it's clean and not 1 minute before. Merrick stared at the woman like she had reached into his chest and moved something. He walked off without a word, which for Merrick was the loudest thing he could have done. The jet was swapped. The contamination went into a report that would, 3 days later, trace back to a fueling truck 2 units over and stop a problem before it ever became a name on a wall. The woman had just saved an engine, a runway, and quite possibly the life of a pilot who had spent the morning calling her Diesel and would never know it. 3 jets down, a crew chief who had been on the line 11 years watched her cap the vial and write the tail number in a small green notebook, and he thought, without quite being able to say why, that he would want a person like that on his aircraft on the worst day of his life. He did not say it out loud. You did not say things like that on a busy ramp. But he quietly moved her swap jet up the priority without being asked, and that was the same thing as saying it. Warwick watched her climb back up into the R-11 and said it to no one at all, under the noise of the line. Where did they get you? By mid-morning, the joke had a life of its own. Diesel was on every net and every lip. The pilots thought it was the funniest thing to hit the squadron in a month, and they wore it out the way pilots wear a thing out, until it stopped being funny and became just a fact of the day. The woman serviced jets in silence and let it ride. She had been called worse by better men in worse places. Merrick was not done. Losing a sortie in front of his wingman had cost him something he could not stand to lose, and he went looking to get it back the way small men always do, off the people below him. He had Sackett pulled from the main row and sent out to the far pits, the long walk, the punishment posting where the heat came off the concrete in waves, and a person worked alone for hours. Her crime was being near the grounded jet. It was petty, and it was deliberate, and it was meant to be seen by everyone so that everyone would learn the price of crossing him. The woman heard about it inside of 10 minutes. She keyed the production desk and asked, in that same flat voice, to take the far pits herself instead. She gave a clean reason. Currency, she said. She needed the reps out there. She did not give the real reason. The real reason was that a scared 20-year-old should not spend a shift baking alone on the concrete because a captain needed to feel large in front of his friends. Sackett found her out at the far pits an hour later, sweating and confused. "Why'd you take my spot? He's just going to be worse to you now. You know that." "Let him," the woman said. She wiped the sample port, checked her watch, glanced at the tower, and called the next event before the tower called it. "They'll roll the foreship in about 90 seconds. Watch the hold short." 90 seconds later, the foreship rolled onto the hold short line, nose to tail, exactly as she had said. Sackett looked at her a long moment. She did not understand yet, but she stopped being afraid of her, which was its own kind of beginning. A knot of junior pilots drifted out to the R-11 on a break, sensing sport, and started quizzing the fuel truck driver on aircraft trivia to watch her stumble in front of them. Fuel flow rates, threat ring geometry, the exact bingo number for the profile they were flying that afternoon. She answered every question flatly and correctly, down to the decimal, and the correctness unnerved them far more than silence ever could have. One of them stopped asking. He looked at her a beat too long, the way a man looks at a word he almost recognizes and cannot quite place, and then his buddy elbowed him and pulled him back toward the ops desk. One of them, a lieutenant barely a year on the jet, lingered a moment after the others had drifted off. He watched her coil a hose in 3 even loops, the exact same way she had coiled the pitot strap at dawn, and he opened his mouth like he wanted to ask something real. Then he thought better of it and went after his friends. She watched him go and wrote nothing about him in the notebook, because a man who almost asks the right question is a different kind of man than the one who never once wonders at all. The woman wrote a tail number and a time in her small green notebook and closed it and slid it back into her chest pocket. Down the row, Warwick did something he hadn't done in a long time. He pulled the Flightline camera log for the morning and saved a copy to his own drive, not to protect Merrick, but because a thing was happening on his ramp that did not add up, and Warwick had learned in hard places to keep a record before he understood why he was going to need it. You know that feeling when you watch someone get treated like they are nothing, and everything in you says there is so much more to this person than the room can see? Hold on to that feeling. That is the whole reason this channel exists. It is for the ones who were written off by people who should have known better. If you are one of them, take 1 second and subscribe to Honor Tales right now, because the woman they spent all morning calling Diesel is about to stop being a secret in front of the entire flight line. The woman closed her notebook and looked at the empty end of the runway, like she was waiting for something to come down out of the sky and land there. Merrick decided mockery was not enough. He went to paper, because paper is where a certain kind of man does his real fighting. He knew, the way that kind of officer always knows, exactly how the system reads a complaint. A rated captain's word against an unnamed fuels augmentee was not a fair fight, and it was not meant to be one. He drafted a maintenance deviation report before lunch at the ops desk, taking his time with it. In it, the refueler had performed an unauthorized grounding, had delayed combat-coded sorties, and had created a safety hazard on an active flight line. He wrote it clean, and he wrote it cold, and he read it back to himself twice. He understood that once a paper like that started climbing, the burden landed on the airman to disprove it, and airmen with no name tape didn't disprove things. They just quietly disappeared off the schedule, and the line closed over the space where they had been. He had done it before. He knew the rhythm of the thing, the report, the whispered word to the right master sergeant, the airman gone by the end of the week, everyone slightly relieved that the awkwardness had resolved itself on its own. It worked because the system was built to trust the person with the rank and the flight suit over the person with the nozzle and the reflective belt. Merrick had never once in his life stood on the wrong side of that assumption. It had genuinely not occurred to him that he ever could. The report climbed. A production controller pulled the woman aside near the fuel pits, plainly uncomfortable, and told her that a deviation had been filed against her and that she might be pulled off the line before the end of the shift. She did not defend herself. She did not raise her voice or ask who or protest that it was unfair. She asked 2 questions, and only 2. What is the exact wording? And what time was it filed? The controller told her. She nodded once, the way a person nods confirming an item on a checklist, not the way a person nods when she has just been accused of endangering an aircraft. She wrote the time in the green notebook. Then she picked up the nozzle and went back to work. Merrick, feeling the wind at his back now, found Sackett in the tool room. He leaned in the doorway so she could not get past him. "Your friend Diesel is done after today," he told her. "The paper's already moving, and anybody who covers for her, anybody who says a word for her, goes down right beside her. You understand me, Airman? Nod if you understand me." Sackett understood him. She was 20, and she was afraid. And for one long second, she almost did the thing that fear tells you to do. Step back. Save yourself. Let the current take the other person, and be grateful it was not you. Then she remembered a woman taking the far pits in the white heat, so that a scared kid would not have to, and she found, to her own surprise, that she could not make herself do it. She did not nod. Merrick held her eyes a moment longer, decided the silence was fear rather than defiance, and walked off satisfied. He had read her exactly wrong, the way he read everyone who did not outrank him. It did not cost him anything yet. It would. Warwick was reading the deviation report at his desk when the whole thing snagged. The report said the grounding was unauthorized and baseless. The camera log, his own saved copy, showed the woman drawing the sample and Warwick himself confirming it bad and ordering the swap. The fuel record showed the contamination logged, quantified, and traced to a truck 2 units over. Every single fact in Merrick's report was contradicted by the record already sitting on Warwick's screen. Warwick did not go to anyone. Not yet. He had learned patience in the places where moving too soon got the wrong person hurt. He opened a new file on his tablet, and this one did not have the refueler's name on it. This one had Merrick's. The paperwork said the fuel truck driver was the problem. every honest record on the ramp said the exact opposite. And Warwick, who had grounded jets and carried caskets, and watched more than one loud man mistake a quiet one for a weak one, sat with both truths open on his screen and began, very carefully, to close the trap that the loud man had built with his own 2 hands. Warwick found her alone at the far pits at noon, when the ramp went white with heat, and everyone who had a choice was inside in the cool. He did not ask her who she was. He was too old and too careful to do a thing that clumsy. He leaned on the fender of the R-11 next to her and looked out at the runway the way she was looking at it. "Merrick's got 3 washed complaints behind him," he said, conversational, like they were talking about weather. 2 airmen and a civilian contractor. All of them true. Everyone. And all of them gone. Because his father flew with the wing commander 20-some years back, and that name still opens doors on this base. You are a fuels augmentee with no name tape and no rank on your chest. I have watched this exact fight play out more than once, and I am telling you plainly, the truck driver does not win it. He let it sit a moment in the heat. So, if you are who I am starting to think you are, walk away from him. Let me handle it my way. That is not me doubting you. That is me telling you which direction the water runs on this particular base. The woman was quiet for a while. When she finally answered, she did not answer the question he had been careful not to ask. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "and Merrick's problem was never me." She looked down the long row of jets, his jets, her jets, the squadron's jets, cooling and ticking in the heat, and she spoke about the line the way a person speaks about a thing that belongs to her. A man who will cut a corner to save his own sortie is a man who will one day cut the corner that kills somebody. That is the problem on this ramp. Not a nickname. Not me. Him. Warwick nodded slowly. Then he laid his small trap, because he had to be certain before he did what he was about to do. "Shame about the profile they're flying this afternoon," he said, casual, examining his own thumbnail. "They run it wrong. Always have. Take the high side gate before the commit instead of after." He watched her mouth. He watched her almost correct him. Watched the words rise up behind her teeth. The exact right words. The small, precise fix that only a weapons school aviator would ever carry. The correction to a tactic that no fuels augmentee alive could possibly know was wrong. He watched her catch it half a breath before it got out. Watched her set it back down and say nothing at all, and pick up the sample vial instead. But Warwick had already seen the catch. And a catch like that tells you everything the words themselves would have told you, and a little more besides. He thought about the 2 washed complaints sitting in a drawer, and the airmen who had filed them, and then transferred away quietly. And he thought about how many mornings he had watched Merrick move fast and loud through the line, and told himself that was just the way pilots were. He had let it ride. Everyone had let it ride. That was exactly how a Merrick got made, not in one large moment, but in 100 small ones, where the people who knew better decided it was not quite worth the fight. He walked back inside, and at his desk, he did the thing he had been avoiding since dawn. He pulled up the incoming squadron commander's official photograph, and the change of command program dated for the very next morning, and he set the tablet flat on the desk under the fluorescent light. He looked at the photograph. Lieutenant Colonel. The eagle on the shoulders. The distinguished flying cross with valor riding at the top of the ribbon rack. A name. A call sign printed right there beneath it. Then he looked out the window, across the shimmering concrete, at the R-11 sitting alone at the far pits, at the woman in the blank coveralls checking a fuel sample in the white noon heat, doing the lowest job on the whole ramp the day before the entire squadron was handed to her. The blood went out of Warwick's face. He knew. He did not say it. Not to anyone. Not out loud. Not yet. He straightened his cover, squared the tablet on the desk with 2 fingers, and started, very quietly, to get his flight line ready for what was coming in the morning. When it came, he wanted his airmen standing the way airmen ought to stand. He figured he owed her that much, and he had not yet earned the right to say a single word about why. If you have ever been underestimated by somebody who had absolutely no idea who they were talking to, you already know exactly how this feels in your chest. Do that quiet, satisfying thing and tap subscribe, because tomorrow morning, the whole flight line finds out who she is all at once. And so do you. That night, in transient billeting, Lieutenant Colonel Sloane Beckett did not put on her uniform. It hung in a garment bag on the closet door, where she could see it from the bed. The eagle of an 05. The distinguished flying cross with valor. The squadron patch she would wear as its commander in 12 hours. Her name in hard black letters on white. Beckett. She could have put it on. She had earned every single thread of it, twice over, in air that her airmen would spend their whole careers never having to breathe. She sat with the coveralls in her lap instead, folded across her knees, and she let herself remember, because she only ever did it when she was completely alone. 2014, second deployment. A long-range escort at altitude, weather stacked to the ceiling, a threat band lit up along the entire route like a string of bad lights. Her wingman was Captain Sawyer Brandt, 26 years old, quick and funny, and good at the job. A man who had turned his phone around on the ramp that very morning to show her a photograph of his daughter, missing a front tooth. Somewhere in the worst 2 minutes of Sloane Beckett's life, the sky came apart, and Brandt's jet was hit, and then Brandt was simply gone, and there was no time at all to grieve him because there were 3 more aircraft strung out behind her that were going to follow him straight into the ground if she did not get them home. She got them home. Battle-damaged, bingo fuel, one of them flying on faith and a prayer and her voice in his ears. She talked a shaking lieutenant down through a landing he had no business surviving, and she did it in the same flat, clipped voice she had used on the fuel radio that morning at dawn, because that voice was the one thing she owned that had never once shaken. They pinned the call sign HAVOC on her that night in a plywood bar with the generators humming, and she had smiled for the photograph and then gone back to her room and sat in the dark with Brandt's empty wing position printed on the inside of her eyes. She had flown with it there ever since. She always would. She had gone to see his daughter every year since. The girl was 13 now, taller than her mother, with her father's exact habit of laughing at her own jokes a half-second early. Beckett never told her much about the flying. She told her that her father had been the kind of man who would turn his whole aircraft around for a wingman, which was true, and which was the reason he was not there to watch his daughter grow tall. Some debts do not get paid down. You just carry them, and you let them make you careful, and you try to be worth what they cost. And 2012, before any of that. A dawn launch on her first deployment. Captain Beckett in a hurry, sortie fever running hot in her, and a young refueler pulling a fuel sample she was too impatient to wait around for. Senior Airman Cyrus Odom, 19 years old. He had held the vial up to the gray light and told a captain, to her face, that her jet wasn't going to fly this morning, and Captain Beckett had very nearly brushed straight past him, had very nearly pulled her rank and bullied a nobody out of her way to make a time on a schedule. Odom had been right. The contamination in that tank would have flamed her engine on the climb-out, right over the departure end of the runway, too low and too slow to do anything at all but die in front of everyone. She had lived because a 19-year-old fuel troop did his job carefully when a captain was in a hurry to skip it. The lowest voice on the line had turned out to be the one that saved her. She had promised herself, that same night, that she would never once forget which direction respect actually flows. That was the whole reason she walked a flight line as a refueler the day before she took command of it. Not to trap anyone. Not to play a clever game with people's careers. She walked it to sea with her own 2 eyes, and no eagle on her shoulders to make anyone perform. Who took the far pits for the scared kid, and who was the man who called a dog with 2 claps of his hands. She wanted to know who her Sacketts were and who her Merricks were, before any single one of them ever learned to stand up straight for the boss. She had her answer now. She had it cold. She zipped the garment bag closed. She set her alarm for 0500, one more morning as a nobody, and then the coveralls came off for good. 0540. The next morning came up gray and cold, exactly like the one before it, and Captain Dane Merrick came up hotter. He had learned at dawn that his afternoon sortie had been questioned a second time, flagged for a rushed refuel that traced straight back to his own signature on the form, and he had decided, with the certainty of a man who cannot afford to be wrong, that the fuel truck driver was behind all of it. He came across the ramp fast, past the ops desk, past his own wingmen who called after him, straight for the jet where the woman stood at the single-point receptacle with the engine already turning and whining for a launch. "You," he said. "You are done. Off my flight line, right now." "Grounds are good," she said, not turning, seating the nozzle with a click. "Step back from the intake, Captain. It's turning." He did not step back. He reached out and grabbed her by the coverall strap at the shoulder and shoved her, hard, backward, away from the aircraft, with a running jet a few feet off and the intake pulling air a body length from where she stumbled. "You are an unauthorized person on an active flight line," he shouted, loud enough for the whole ramp, loud enough for every camera on the mast. "You're a security risk, and I am personally having you removed from my jets." It happened directly in front of Sackett. It happened in front of Warwick. It happened in front of 4 flight line cameras and a hot intake, and every part of it was recorded, and Merrick was too far gone in his own anger to understand that he had just handed the record the one and only thing it had still been missing. Beckett did not fall. Even shoved off balance, she stepped and turned like aircrew clearing a hazard, off the strap, off the intake line, her body finding the safe geometry on pure instinct, her eyes never once leaving the running engine. She had been thrown around by far worse than a captain in far worse places than a home station ramp. She came to rest 3 feet away, squared up, hands loose and open at her sides. She did not raise one of them. Sackett started forward to help her. Beckett stopped the girl cold with a single look. "Do not." Warwick was already keying his radio and moving, fast for a big man. But the timing was set now, and Beckett could hear the thing coming before any of the rest of them could. The faint growl entering the overhead pattern, right on schedule, right on the second, the way she had known it would. She reached up and straightened the strap on her shoulder, unhurried. She looked Captain Dane Merrick full in the face for the first time in 2 days. And she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a person who has been patient for a very long time and has just decided to stop being patient. For 2 full days she had let him build it. The nickname, the report, the exile of a frightened girl to the far pits, and now his own 2 hands on her shoulder in front of every camera on the mast. She had not needed to lift a single finger against him. A man like Merrick did not require an opponent. He only required enough rope and an audience, and she had handed him both, and simply waited for the morning to arrive. "You should not put your hands on people near a running jet, Captain," she said, quiet, almost kind. Overhead, the tower frequency opened, and a voice came down out of the pattern and said a single word that Captain Dane Merrick did not expect to hear in 1,000 years. "HAVOC, Venom Flight, 2-ship, checking in as fragged. Welcome aboard, ma'am." The words came over the net and out of the line speakers at the same instant, clear across the whole ramp, and the flight line stopped. Venom 1 in the overhead brake, wings flashing as she pulled. Then Venom 2, right behind her in the pattern, keying up with a grin you could hear straight through the radio static. "HAVOC, Venom 2. Real good to have you, boss." Every airman on that ramp wore a radio. Every single one of them had just heard 2 F-35s check in with the incoming squadron commander's call sign, spoken plainly, warmly, to the woman in the blank coveralls that a captain had shoved toward a running intake 10 seconds before. The silence held for 1 full second. 2. Then, Senior Master Sergeant Elias Warwick turned to face the row, came to attention so hard his boot heels cracked on the concrete, and called it in a voice that carried the entire length of the flight line. "Flight line, attention!" The ramp snapped. Airmen, crew chiefs, fuels troops, the junior pilots who had quizzed her at the R-11 the day before. Every one of them came to attention and turned toward the refueler standing at the single point of the jet. Sackett came to attention with tears standing bright in her eyes, because she understood now, all of it, all at once. The far pits, and the bond wire, and the quiet, and the green notebook. The whole shape of it landing in her chest in one piece. Somewhere down the row, a young airman who had called her Diesel the day before came to attention with his whole face burning, and he would remember this exact moment for the rest of his career. The morning he learned, once and for all, that you never, ever know who is standing in front of you inside a set of blank coveralls. Beckett reached up to the borrowed handset on the crew chief's headset cord and keyed it. Her voice went out over the net in perfect brevity. Calm, cleared, unmistakably the mission commander she had been for a decade. "Venom flight, HAVOC. Copy 2 ship as fragged. Push button 4 for the tanker. Mind your high side gate on the Comet. And bring my jets home clean. Good pass on the brake, too." Then she let go of the handset. She reached down slowly and pulled the reflective belt off the coveralls and dropped it on the R-11's step. And she let Captain Dane Merrick stand there and look at the woman he had been calling Diesel for 2 days straight. "I go by HAVOC, sir," she said. His face went through it in order, the way it always does. Confusion first. A fuels augmentee does not have a call sign. This has to be a mistake. This is a joke going the wrong direction somehow. Then disbelief as the belt hit the metal step and the whole ramp stayed rigidly at attention and not one single person laughed. Then recognition, cold and total. The change of command program he had walked past on the squadron board a dozen times, flashing back up behind his eyes with a photograph on it and a call sign printed under the name. Then, last, horror. He had asked his own incoming commander to name her call sign as a joke. He had filed a false report against her and pushed it up the chain. He had put his hands on her and shoved her toward a running intake with 4 cameras watching him do it. He looked around the ramp for someone to laugh with, the way he always had, and found there was no one left to do it. His wingmen stood at attention with all the rest. The junior pilots who had echoed his nickname stood at attention. Even the crew chief whose jet he was standing beside stood rigid and stared straight ahead and would not give him so much as a glance. Whatever it was he had been standing on his whole career, it was simply gone now, and he was standing on nothing at all, in front of every person he had ever performed for. Warwick brought the rest of it forward, quiet and merciless as a closing door. "Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Beckett assumes command of this squadron at 0900 this morning. You've had 2 mornings with her." He did not smile. He did not need to. "Security Forces is inbound. Not for her, sir. For the shove near a turning engine." Merrick, ghost white, understood. The fuel truck driver he had asked to name her call sign as a joke had just answered him. And it was his. It came apart for Merrick fast, the way these things always do once the first honest record is finally on the table. The shove was only the surface of it. In her real uniform now, the eagle riding on her shoulders, the distinguished flying cross at her chest, the name Beckett stitched where the blank coveralls had carried nothing at all. Lieutenant Colonel Sloan Beckett sat down with Warwick and the squadron safety officer and laid the facts out in a single clean row, the way she laid out everything in her life. The false deviation report, the camera log that flatly contradicted it, the fuel record with the contamination quantified and traced, and, pulled from 6 full months of maintenance history, the thing Warwick had been quietly circling since the very first grounded jet. A long string of Merrick-signed shortcuts, rushed refuels signed off without the sample, falsified safety inspections, 2 washed complaints from junior airmen who had tried to flag exactly this pattern and been made to disappear off the schedule for their trouble. He had not been protecting his precious sortie count. He had been gambling, quietly and steadily, with the lives of the people who strapped into the jets he signed off, and he had been calling it swagger the whole time. The safety officer opened a flying evaluation board that afternoon. Beckett grounded Captain Merrick on the spot that morning, before she had even pinned on command of the squadron he flew in. There were no handcuffs. She did not want the theater of it, and he did not warrant a cell. The sentence was the only one that would ever actually reach a man built the way he was built. He would not fly. The wings that were his entire identity, the thing he wore like armor over whatever was underneath, were pulled. Pending a board he was not going to win. Because the record he had so carefully built against a nameless fuel troop was now the exact record being read back, line by line, against him. Word of it moved through the squadron by noon, and it did not travel the way his nickname had traveled the day before. It traveled quiet. Pilots who had laughed at the fuel truck driver found they could not quite meet each other's eyes at the ops desk. A few of them went and found the woman, the colonel, and said the small, awkward things men say when they are trying to apologize without ever using the word. She took each of them the same way, evenly, without cruelty and without warmth. She had not walked the line for 2 days to collect apologies. She had walked it to find out who these people really were, and now she knew, and the knowing was the only thing she had come for. Then Beckett did the thing the whole 2 mornings had actually been for. She put Airman First Class Lena Sackett forward, the scared 20-year-old Merrick had exiled to the far pits to make a point, for formal recognition. For catching a bond wire fault in her 2nd week on the line. For standing her ground in a doorway when a captain told her to run and abandon someone. And she personally signed Sackett onto a mentorship track, a real one, the kind that ends with a commissioning packet and gold bars on a young woman's shoulders, the kind of future that no one had ever once suggested a fuels apprentice was allowed to reach for. The lowest voice on the line got lifted, on purpose, by the one person on that entire base who knew down to the bone exactly what that was worth. If this story got to you, if you have ever watched a quiet, decent person finally get seen for who they really are, take 1 single second and subscribe to Honor Tales. The stories of the ones who were underestimated live or die by whether people like you keep choosing to watch them. That is the entire thing. Thank you for being here for it. Dusk at the fuel pit. The ramp had gone gold and quiet. The jets home and cooling and ticking. The day's noise all burned off into the evening. Beckett walked out alone to where the R-11 sat, and she stood in the exact spot where a 19-year-old named Cyrus Odom had once stood and saved a captain's life with a fuel sample she had almost been too proud to wait around for. She drew a sample herself, held it up to the last of the light, watched it run clean and gold and empty of any gray thread at all. She did it, not because anyone had told her to. She did it because respect flows in one direction, and she had promised herself, a long time ago in the dark, that she would never once forget which. Warwick came out and stood beside her at the pit. He did not say anything. Neither did she. There was nothing at all that needed saying between two people who both already knew, all the way down, exactly what the lowest voice on the line was worth. He had a granddaughter shipping to basic training in the fall, he almost told her. He did not. But he decided, standing there in the last of the gold light, that he would keep one story back for the night she called home discouraged and ready to quit, and that it would be this one. The colonel who drove a fuel truck for 2 days so she would know, before she ever pinned it on, which of her people to trust with the rest of them. Her phone buzzed once in the leg pocket of the coveralls she had not quite taken off yet. A secure message, a coded greeting she had not seen in almost a year, from a name she had let herself believe was finished. Anvil for HAVOC. Westpac wants you by the end of the month. Can you be there? She looked at the empty end of the runway, the very same way she had on that first gray morning, waiting for something to come down, out of the sky, and land there. Then she capped the sample, and she closed the phone, and she walked toward the next mission, with the vial still cool against her palm. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.